Hello, hi, it's me, it's Will, back at it for another one. A question here today. Good to see you. I am gonna jump in with the question today. The question in my head is, how much thinking is too much thinking? So, I want to come at this from a couple angles, I guess. First, anxious overthinking. Second, intellectualizing. So I'm going to define what I mean by anxious overthinking first. So, anxious overthinking in my head is when you have a lot of racing thoughts about an event, something that's going to happen, something that you're anticipating coming up, and you don't feel you don't have the full grasp of it. So you try and think of other angles around it. You think of what could happen, what could go wrong, and then essentially the more you've got in your head, the more that's more, if I'm going to use a computer analogy because I'm a computer nerd, but there's in computers, there's a CPU, right? And that's like the brain of the computer in a way, right? It crunches the numbers, the ones and zeros. So if you have a kind of powerful CPU, right, and you're thinking and you can't get an answer, you're going to think more, right? And I guess in my experience, I think that this happens a lot when I'm not super emotionally regulated. So if I'm I guess a really key indicator for this for me when I'm overthinking a lot is when I feel kind of a bit vulnerable and a bit weak and I'm struggling. And right now I kind of feel like that, which I think is where the question's coming from, because I had a bit of a funny moment and I had a bit of kind of diarrhea and vomiting yesterday. And I'm coming off the end of that, and today I'm still not 100%, so I'm feeling a bit delicate, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable. And I guess I'm noticing that I'm having those overthinking thoughts a little more, right? Of oh, am I doing enough? Am I being present enough at my work? Am I trying hard enough? Should I even be here? Should I be resting? All these questions kind of coming up for me, right? And I would classify those as overthinking thoughts. And I think overthinking thoughts kind of come in my head from this idea that you're trying to create a degree of reassurance where you feel you can't naturally get it right. In my head, failure actually requires a good amount of energy to be okay with, right? You have the right amount of energy to fail. You'll go into a situation, something will happen, the outcome will be different to what you want, because you have more resources and energy in your head, your body. You can be flexible with your expectation of the outcome. But when you have less energy, I notice in me, and I don't know if you guys relate with this, but when I have less energy, I kind of need a concrete outcome, and then my overthinking brain's trying to give me a concrete outcome. But actually, often I just stumble into more of what could go wrong. That has me feeling more trapped. That has me feeling more kind of anxious and worried and oh no, what can I do? And a lot of this is coming for me kind of because sometimes I'm feeling a little nauseous because I was throwing up yesterday. And I've been really trying to sit with those thoughts a bit. But then it's interesting because I guess I notice for me, when you have less energy again to be okay with those outcomes, it's also harder to just sit with yourself. So I'm finding it harder to be present today, I think. And thinking here, I think my thinking muscles are trying to help me out here. They're trying to help me stabilize. They're trying, but it's also not super helpful. And I think part of where the overthinking comes from for me is that I feel I can't just let go and let things happen sometimes, especially when I'm tired and unwell, right? And I had a bad night's sleep last night, but the night before I didn't really sleep much at all. And it was rough, man. But today I'm kind of a bit better. There's less overthinking thoughts. I'm trying to just throw myself into things and move a little bit and stretch, but not too much. I guess I could also say the overthinking because my wife was hey, here's this meal I cooked yesterday because we have the Gusto boxes, not sponsored. And I was anxious about eating it. I didn't eat it because it had chili flakes in it, and I was overthinking and anxiously researching what you should and shouldn't eat when you are having diarrhea and vomiting. And spicy foods was really high up on that list. So while it might not register as spicy in my normal context because I quite enjoy a bit of spice, I think it also highlights to me that, like, again, there's that overthinking. That's, I'm trying to protect, I'm getting anxious about my health. Am I going to make this worse with this decision? I'm not going to be able to meet my expectations, my standards of what I do and how I help people and how I want to help myself, how I want to serve myself. And maybe this whole channel, in a way, is an exercise of overthinking, right? Of me asking one question and then kind of talking about it for like 10 to 20 minutes, going and going and going, right? You could certainly argue that. But I guess how much thinking is too much thinking? To come back to the core question, is like, I think that depends on how much failure you can handle, given with where you're at, right? I think people I notice that really struggle with handling a variety of outcomes, and I certainly feel this when I'm like less well right now, it makes me want to kind of take a little more control, come in, grab a bit more, put more effort in, try and control the outcome more. And like that kind of has pros and cons. I think that can make me more emotionally reactive, I think. And I certainly noticed this is a bit emotionally off kilter from what I would usually be. But I think for me, I really try and stay kind of steady as possible. There's a lot of stuff I do to try and stay steady, like journaling and whatnot. But I've been on my phone a lot, man, while I've been throwing up and diarrheaing and everything, right? Which, for my usual standards of how I want to be as a person, that flies in the face of my expectations, and then I overthink, what am I doing? I'm maybe disappointing myself, letting myself down because I'm just like doom scrolling relentlessly all day between the gross stuff I described before. So you could come in with some self-compassion there. I'm certainly trying to exercise a bit of that at the moment. That, you know, I've just had a rough time, and sometimes I'm going to just lean into that stuff and I'm going to move on. I'm still using my phone a bit today, more than I'd like, but not a ton, I guess. That's mainly the overthinking part. I wanted to address the intellectualization part after that. I think this kind of goes with the similar mechanism of the overthinking. I would say intellectualizing is something that I used to do a lot, and I want to define over it like intellectualizing a bit. So turning away what happens into something distant, okay? So like even in the words I'm explicitly using, I felt this, I felt that, this is my opinion, this is what I think. It's like more leaning into the subjective instead of the objective, right? And I do for those not watching, I in quotes mean I guess I'm a believer in a way that there is not necessarily an objective, right? We all have different kind of lenses that we look at the world through. You know, who's to say the sky's really blue? The sky's really blue. It's because the electromagnetic waves get diffused in the ozone layer, and there isn't actually blue up there. It's just that blue is the wavelength that shows through the ozone, right? So we think the sky is blue, which is a subjective human experience. So I think we get hung up a lot on what is objective, but I think historically I was really orientated towards being objective and getting the facts and everything. But the more I've learned as I've grown up is actually like a lot of this like intellectualizing stuff, like thinking, using logic, reason, which is something I see a lot online. I'm getting a lot of Jordan Peterson related content at the moment, like philosophy related content on my feed. I don't know if it's just what I'm clicking on, but whatever. But it's a lot of thinking, right? And it's a lot less about the emotive human subjective experience. It kind of devalues the subjective experience. And I guess I've always felt like that I've been a lot stronger in articulating and expressing the subjective experience, which is maybe why I'm here doing this. But also I feel that the intellectualized idea of what is super concrete and real is like useful in certain contexts. But when I think about like, how do I help myself feel happy in my life, the intellectual angles don't really, there's no merit there. You know, if I'm like an operating room, I'm a surgeon, and I am told that I have to remove somebody's spleen or like a gallbladder or something, you know, something's happening. I'm doing a surgery. It's really important that we have a collective accepted understanding of like what a spleen is, right? I don't want to remove a kidney by mistake. It's really important that we have that, right? When we're like in situations where we're doing specific work with specific outcomes. But when we're thinking about like processing our emotions and like being a human and like exploring that, like, and you know, growing and developing, I think, as a person as well, I think the objective is actually a hindrance often in growth and self-development as a human being, because I think a lot of the growth comes from our subjective understanding, and I think the idea of objective leads to a lot of like rigid thinking. See, I think of maybe even over-intellectualizing. But my point is, people, me individually, feel like the more I've let into my feelings and my subjective experience, the more I've learnt about myself and better calibrated how much thinking is too much thinking, right? So if I over-intellectualize and I'm thinking like, well, like Aristotle said this and Socrates said that, and these are good morals to live by in the world, what is an ethical person, what is it to be man, etc., that's all like cool, but like how is that emotionally connected from my experience? Why should I like care about that? And I feel I use a lot of that stuff historically to intentionally dodge having opinions and being disagreeable and having my own subjective experience valued. So I'm trying to do that less, because I think too much thinking gets in the way of feeling. And when you don't feel, you aren't whatever you are in this moment. And if you aren't whatever you are in this moment, life just feels bleak. Life just feels empty. So I'm going to encourage you to maybe be you a little more this week, whatever that looks like. Lean into the subjective. Stats are fun. You know, science is good and useful, but it's also our iterative understanding of the world, and we should listen to people that have done very specific investigations of how things are. But we're all still learning, we're all still growing, things can change. If we get value from the best thought through idea of the time of how we should be in some ways, I think we should lean into that, and then we should listen to our subjective experience, right? And I'm trying to do that a bit more, right? But the whole with Manjaro, it's interestingly, it's like, don't eat white bread, right? But also when you have diarrhea, eat foods that are easily digestible, like white bread. So and bananas, right? So I'm like eating a banana, and I'm like, this makes me feel a little sick. And I eat bread, and I'm like, this doesn't make me feel as sick. So while, in theory, according to the research, I should eat bananas and white bread to reduce the whole diarrhea problem, I'm not going to eat any more bananas, I'm just going to eat white bread. So that's my take. How much thinking is too much thinking? Would love to hear your thoughts. Take care. See you in the next video. Goodbye.